Mark your calendars. Sometime in the coming days, Donald Trump could go from a disgrace, twice impeached, thrice indicted former president to a disgrace, twice impeached, quadruple indicted former president. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis expected to present her case next week against Trump for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. And he may not be the only one who gets indicted. From the New York Times, quote, "The Georgia investigation may be the most expansive legal challenge yet to the efforts that Mr. Trump and his advisors undertook to keep him in power after he lost the 2020 election. Nearly 20 people are known to have been told that they could face charges as a result of the investigation. We also know that at least 3 former Georgia officials could take the stand in the next few days as part of Willis's presentation to seek indictments. Former Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who was president of the state Senate at the time, as well as former Democratic state lawmakers Jen Jordan and Bee Nguyen, who were present for that December 2020 hearing in which Rudy Giuliani peddled conspiracy theories about election fraud and proposed a fake slate of electors. Joining our conversation, political columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Patricia Murphy. Barb and Rick are both back with us. Patricia, special grand jury in Fulton County spent nearly 8 months helping Willis compile evidence, later recommended a series of indictments. How can we expect Willis to use these witnesses in her presentation?
Well, we certainly think that she's going to use these witnesses to continue to lay out her case that Donald Trump was involved in most likely a criminal conspiracy to overturn the Georgia election results in a way that was not legal. That will most likely involve multiple other people, we understand. And Fani Willis, the district attorney here, has many times brought RICO charges, meaning that they would be racketeering charges, indicating that it would be sort of a large criminal conspiracy, including many people, many different storylines, and many different efforts, all getting to the same point, which would be to overturn the 2020 elections here in Georgia.
Barbara, here was one of those expected witnesses, former Georgia Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, and what he describes as the turning point in the push to overturn Joe Biden's win in Georgia. Take a listen.
For me, one of the pinnacle kind of broken moments in this whole process was the State Farm Arena. Right here we have this kind of cooked up fake Senate hearing that shows up at the Georgia Capitol that Rudy Giuliani put on for the sole purpose, in my opinion, of releasing a spliced up video that he sold as pretty much a steady stream of video. He started to take those folks that were on the fence, good, hardworking Republicans that were on the fence, and all of a sudden the president of the United States is telling them that this is a real video. Rudy Giuliani and the entire apparatus are telling them it's real. And sure enough, it's not. It's just bits and pieces of misinformation.
Right, but it is additionally compelling when you hear witnesses lay out exactly what happened. These witnesses are going to be key for building Fani Willis's case. If you are Willis, how do you deploy them in a way that tells a clear, linear narrative?
Well, it appears that Fani Willis may be looking at several different schemes and maybe even using the RICO statute to bring them all together. And so keeping those straight could be a challenge for a jury. And so my guess is that she would tell the story in chapters. She would talk about the fake electors chapter. She would talk about the threats to poll workers chapter. And then this one, the pressuring of public officials in the Georgia state legislature, might be its own chapter. And here we would hear from witnesses like this one who could tell their stories so that people could understand. I think one thing that is particularly compelling and that will give these witnesses credibility is many of these witnesses are Republicans. And, you know, it shouldn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, but I think it makes it more difficult for Trump and his lawyers to cross-examine them based on any sort of political bias when you've got Republican office holders saying that they were trying to sell a bill of goods to the Georgia voters.
Right. And that strikes me, Rick, that in as much as that is true in legal court, which is most critical here, that also there's an element of truth for that in the court of public opinion, right? The fact that it's not easy to dismiss everyone who's getting up on that witness stand as a Democrat who has agenda. These are Republicans who don't want to be here, right? Who don't want to be in the middle of this, standing up and doing the right thing and sharing with the people of Georgia and the people of the United States what it was that happened that led to that day.
Yes, and the fact that it's local, I mean, Americans trust their local mechanisms, their local institutions. According to reports, half of the phony, bogus electors of the 16 have cooperated. They're all Republican. when Trump said to Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State, can you find me 11,780 votes? He's dealing with people who would supposedly support him, but in the end supported the law and supported the Constitution. I think that will be powerful not only to the people of Georgia, but the people around the country.
Patricia, this investigation, it began February 2021, before the January 6th Select Committee was established, before Trump's second impeachment trial wrapped. What have you learned about the depth, the breadth of this investigation?
Well, we have learned certainly by finding out who were witnesses in the special grand jury investigation, and then again, who is being duplicated in this investigation, exactly what kind of strings and strands of a storyline Fani Willis may be pulling. So we look at Bee Nguyen and Jen Jordan. They were both on the receiving end of Rudy Giuliani's false testimony at the Georgia State Senate and the Georgia State House. We certainly have seen Governor Brian Kemp was called before the special grand jury. So was Brad Raffensperger. So were Coffee County officials. I think that's going to be an important part of this as well. We've seen people, including Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, also testified about exactly as they did to the January 6th committee, about just the incredible effect, the incredibly damaging effect all of this had on them and their personal lives, their personal safety, receiving multiple death threats, and they were far from the only ones. We also know that Brad Raffensperger's wife testified to the special grand jury about the death threats that she received. It was an incredibly dangerous time, and I think that Fani Willis is trying to show that this wasn't just an effort to move around pieces of paper. This was not a victimless crime. There were people whose lives were just completely turned upside down and whose lives were put in very serious and real danger by the actions of the former president and many of his associates. So we've learned it goes very deep, very wide, in some cases across the state, and multiple storylines, and that again lends itself to the concept of a racketeering charge as well.
It's just so remarkable, Rick, that we know so much before we even read this indictment, right? That as Barb said, a big part of the task is going to be walking us through this chapter by chapter so we understand the multiple pieces of it. But we already understand. We already have the tape that we have heard ad nauseum. I mean, it is going to be amazing to sit down with that indictment and almost see what more there is.
Well, she has to tell the story in a linear way that makes sense. And actually, one of the things that are ironic about it, Barb mentioned this, is that she may use the RICO statutes, the racketeering statutes, which was first used by Rudolph Giuliani when he was a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York against the mafia. She's turning the tables on him, and what he did to those local election officials in Georgia was really just odious, and he ruined their lives with kind of impunity until now for this false elector scheme.